So like Professor Owen said, thanks so much for being here, Ellie. So today we'll be talking to Ellie Warner-Rousseau, who graduated from BC in 2019. She works as a research assistant at MDRC, an education and social policy research organization in New York City. So Mahima and I will start by asking Ellie some questions about her career path, and then if anyone else has questions, they can ask afterwards. And just so people are aware, we are recording the conversation, so people who couldn't make it today can watch it later. So with that, we can get started. Ellie, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself? Maybe tell us a bit about your experience at BC and what you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. So like you said, I graduated from BC a few years ago, 2019, and I majored in international studies, and I was in the ethics and international social justice cluster with a focus in global health. So a lot of my coursework was related to immigrants and refugees and healthcare systems, both in the US and internationally. And I also worked as a research assistant for Professor Ashley Dugan in the communications department, wrote my thesis with her as my advisor about refugee healthcare in the US. And I also was a part of Strong Women, Strong Girls, which is a mentoring organization. So spent a lot of time with 3rd to 5th grade girls in Boston public school system while I was at BC as well, which I loved. And since graduating, I moved to New York City, where I started work at Henry Street Settlement, and I was specifically working in their family shelter for domestic violence survivors. So I was working with mainly women and their kids to get access to services, enroll in, different healthcare treatment programs, school education, get legal help, all kinds of different services that people might need who are living in the shelter system. And I really loved that work. I loved working directly with folks who were going through a lot, but were always super resilient. And since November, I left that job and started working at MDRC, which, as you mentioned, is a social policy research organization. So they do a lot of different stuff within education, both K through 12 and post-secondary, with different public assistance programs all around the country. So they are based in New York, but they do work all across the country. And I'm specifically working in their Center for Applied Behavioral Science. So behavioral science was something I didn't know a lot about, but it's basically just kind of the study of the way people make decisions, what motivates them, or doesn't motivate them to behave in certain ways. And so I work within that particular center at MDRC, but I'm able to do, work across different policy areas. So I get to see a little bit of everything, which is really nice. So that's what I'm up to now. I can go into more detail about that role if you want, or I can hold off till later.
Yeah, we can just get started with the questions we have planned. So our first one is, how did you approach your job search during your senior year at BC? And if you have any do's and don'ts regarding the job search.
Yeah, I think some advice that I got that I found really helpful was, to just understand that different fields and different industries are going to have really different timelines for when they're looking to hire. And so I had a lot of friends who were in CSUM who were, maybe getting consulting positions or something like that. And they were getting hired like a year and a half before graduating. And I was looking to go into more of the social service field. And, my timeline was more that I got hired and then in 2 weeks I started work. And so I think just being aware of what is realistic in terms of timeline for the sort of job that you're looking for or the field you want to go into. And so, maybe, you don't have to beat yourself up about not having a job 2 years before you graduate, because I know that can sometimes at BC feel like a big pressure that, you want to have something to tell your friends and your family that you're going to do. You want to have a plan. I definitely felt that pressure myself, but it just wasn't for the types of work that the types of jobs I was looking at. It wasn't realistic that I was going to be hired that far in advance or, be able to say with certainty where I was going to be working. So I think that's just one major piece of advice I have. And I also, like, personally, I had to cast a really wide net to get any interviews, to get any interest in, um, the employers that I was looking to work with. And so, it can feel like a lot of rejection as you're going through the job process. And so, for me, it was just important to like remind myself that it wasn't a reflection of, the worth that I could bring to a company, but um, could be about a host of other factors. And so, yeah, I think for me personally, it was just like cutting myself slack during the during the job search process, and recognizing that the right thing would come, and to just keep applying to as many things as possible, and yeah, just trust that something would come out of that.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Another thing we were wondering is what skills did you learn at BC that you think have most helped you in jobs that you've held since graduating? And are there any skills that you wish you developed more before graduating?
Yeah, I think probably the number one thing that I'm really grateful, that I was able to hone with professors like Professor Owens here, was my writing skills. I think that being able to communicate, um, especially through writing, is so important in probably any any workplace that you're going to enter. And so, even as simple as writing emails, sometimes I'll receive emails where I'm like, I don't even know what this person is asking me. It's really not clear. So I think those little skills can transfer into a lot of different types of work. And with what I'm doing now, I'm writing things like proposals and reports, and being able to have those critical thinking skills to know kind of like who your audience is, what you're trying to convince them of, what the tone should be, whether it's academic or more conversational, kind of like being able to navigate those different audiences that you might be interacting with. I feel like I was able to, through my thesis, through different research experiences I had, and then also through a lot of the coursework I had at BC, I think that my writing improved a lot, and that is, like a huge strength in literally any workplace. So that one I definitely, I feel like was really important. I think I do wish I had maybe taken, a few more quantitative courses or computer science related courses, because that's definitely something that a lot of employers are looking for in the research world that I'm in now. It would be really helpful for me to know like different coding or programming things like SAS or R. Those weren't things that I ever really explored at BC, but I know the resources are there. I had a friend take like a 1 or 2 credit course their senior year to learn R. So like little things like that doesn't have to be a huge commitment, but something just to, kind of get the basics of what different programming languages might look like. I think that would be, if I could do it again, I would definitely take advantage of that.
Thank you. So, how did your work experiences and club activities at BC help prepare you for your job after graduation? You mentioned that you did Strong Women, Strong Girls, but any internship experiences or anything like that?
Yeah, I think for Strong Women, Strong Girls, there was a lot of direct correlation to my first job as a case manager, because I was working directly with kids. And so being able to build rapport and have some sense of sort of, what's developmentally appropriate for different ages, that was a really clear, application of that type of engagement. I also think through my club experiences, I was on, the e-board for Strong Women, Strong Girls, and I was able to like facilitate different discussions and meetings for that group, about different social justice topics as they related to mentoring. And I feel like being able to kind of take a leadership role has helped me now like facilitate meetings in the workplace I'm in, and feel confident to be able to like raise my voice if I see something that, that I have a thought on, or think that, I could add something of value. I think taking advantage of those opportunities to be a leader in those club situations is something that's helped me tremendously. Um, and I also worked, the summer after my junior year for the Boston Medical Center's Center for Refugee Health and Human Rights. And so that was a really helpful internship experience for me to be able to see kind of what social services, look like for different populations. So seeing everything from, the mental health and healthcare side, which was what I was most interested in, to, food insecurity and how people go about the job search if they don't have a lot of time and resources to, devote to it. So that was really a really helpful, informative experience for me. And that was really what made me want to get into case management. And I feel really glad that I did sort of the direct service work first before I got into the research world a little bit more, because I do feel like the research I do now is so informed by those experiences I had, working directly with people and kind of knowing what kinds of barriers they face. And so maybe there's a really good idea that some researchers have about what's going to work or help people. And I have this lens to say, well, like, I think we would have to be careful to do it in this way because this group might think this, or, I feel like I'm able to actually add something to the research process and the more kind of like macro thinking, because I've had those more clinical or micro direct experiences. So I feel like getting a little bit of both at BC was really helpful, because I had some of the research experience, but also some of the direct kind of human to human contact that ended up being really helpful for me in the case management and research work. So I think anything people can do to kind of get a little bit of both of those experiences is really helpful.
Yeah, that's really interesting and helpful. And thinking about, so the two positions you've had after graduation, the first at Henry Street Settlement and then now at MDRC, one thing we were wondering is how you heard of those jobs that were open in the first place, and also what the application process was like for each. I'm guessing it was pretty different since they're sort of different types of positions, but I think it'd be helpful to hear kind of what that process was like.
Yeah, and I know there's like different ways to search for jobs. I found both of those on Indeed, just kind of like looking at keywords that were related to what I was looking for. So when I was looking for the case management position, I was, searching things like case manager, but also things like gender or, just different things that I had an interest in that I thought, who knows, we'll see what comes up with this search. And so like, I guess it feels a little bit random, but that was, how both of those sort of fell into my lap. And then in terms of the application process with Henry Street Settlement, it was quite a series of interviews. It was more intensive than I had thought it would be. I think I had sort of this assumption that shelter work and case management work is, a field that, to some extent it is a field that is, not well resourced. And so there's kind of always a need for staff. There's a lot of turnover. But I was glad to have gone through a kind of intensive interview process with them, because I felt by the time I was saying yes to the job that I kind of knew the people I was going to be working with and felt comfortable with them and had a better sense of what the work actually was going to look like. So I think there was, a phone interview and then 2 in-person interviews where I got to meet both, the director of the program, the deputy director of the entire shelter program, got to meet with the social workers who work with the kids, the housing specialist. So that was really helpful for me to just kind of like see how the organization works a little bit more and get a sense for it, which was harder with the MDRC application just because everything was remote. So I think a little bit gets lost, at least for me there, and not being able to kind of see how people are interacting and see the more kind of like organic office culture. So I think I just had to be a little bit more intentional with the questions I was asking to be able to get at what, office morale and company culture looked like. And so for the MDRC application process, I did do a case study, which was something that was totally new to me. That wasn't something I'd ever had to do for any job application before. So, but it was actually pretty fun and kind of a cool experience where they sent me this mock letter that that a public assistance office might send to a client and ask me to redesign it. And so that was a skill set that was pretty new to me. So I had to do a little bit of my own research to kind of figure out what makes sense for that. But as with a lot of behavioral science things, it's all pretty intuitive, but it's a lot of stuff that we don't do and that government agencies in particular don't do, where it's like, this form is tiny print and it's all black and white and it's really hard to tell like what it's saying because it's not written in a way that's really accessible. And so again, that's where kind of the writing skills came into play, where it's like, well, how can we just make this as clear as possible to the person that's going to be reading it and make it really obvious what the next steps are for them. So that was sort of what the case study was about. And then after that, I had, some virtual Zoom interviews with them. Where, it was pretty standard questions, but I felt like I was able to get kind of a sense of how they operated and ask a lot of my own questions, which I think I was more empowered to do the second time around. Going through the job search the second time around, I felt like I was able to ask questions about what I wanted to see in a workplace, and not just feel like I had to, not only that I had to be the perfect candidate, but also that I wanted them to be the right, workplace for me. And so being able to figure out what I wanted to ask to really get a sense of if this is a place I want to work, and not feel so much like I just have to be putting on this perfect show for them.
Can you talk a little bit more about your day-to-day work at the Center for Applied Behavioral Science, and like what specifically you do for your research?
Yeah, so right now I'm working on a project with the New York City Department of Education with their Office of Student Enrollment. So we're providing technical assistance to them, which basically means we're meeting with them regularly and helping them kind of think through, how they're reaching parents, how they can create tools that make it easier, or as easy as possible, for parents to figure out which schools they want to apply, for their kids to go to. New York City and a lot of other big school districts in the country are going through a lot of changes related to kind of like school choice policies, and parents having more freedom to choose schools that are outside of their specific neighborhood or their zone, for example. So I've learned a lot about kind of how those issues are related to issues of equity, and kind of like which parents have the time and resources to like really go through a thorough process of researching schools, and what does a good school mean to different parents, and all of those factors. So we're basically working with them to create different, we made, for example, one tool where parents could just answer a bunch of yes or no questions, and then from those questions, we pointed them to schools where their kids would be eligible to apply to. So it kind of eliminated some of the legwork that parents might normally have to do on their own, which we know, especially for low income parents, it can be really hard to like just find the time when you're working multiple jobs, or, you have a lot of other burdens or other barriers to your time. So that's been a really interesting project and very cool because it's a small team. I just work with, 3 or 4 researchers, and then we work with the team at the Department of Education, which is about 7 of them. So it's pretty small, but I feel like I'm getting to see how they kind of build relationships and facilitate kind of long-term sustainable partnership, which I think is really important. And I'm also working on a couple different proposals right now. So like I mentioned, that's, where a lot of the writing comes in, and I help kind of coordinate, getting everything all set to send to funders, which is something that I didn't like, have too much experience with. So I'm learning a lot on the job, but that's another really clear example where it's great to be able to quickly pick up what the audience is looking for, and be able to kind of tailor your writing to that. And so we're about to submit a proposal to UChicago's crime lab to kind of maybe provide app development assistance to them to help people who are affected by community violence to get additional support outside of like a mental health treatment program. So that one I'm really excited about. I think it would be really cool. So that's kind of where a lot of my time is. But I think when things are a bit more open, I'll also get to go visit sites in person, which I'm really excited to do, and do some of the actual data collection in conjunction with our partner sites. So doing things like interviews, observations, I'll be able to work with a couple different partners, including a Head Start, like early childhood education site in Detroit, and a public assistance office in Washington State. So there's like, kind of a really nice variety of different social service and education programs. And I'm really hopeful that I'll get to, eventually see some of those people in person and see their operations in person to help them sort of think through what kind of intervention we want to design and test.
That sounds really cool. I hope you can visit them soon too. You kind of touched on this a bit, talking about like the importance of writing, but we were wondering how research at MDRC compares to research you might have done at BC, like with your thesis that you mentioned, or as a URF with a professor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. I think things like literature reviews are going to be pretty, standard. That's a great skill to have. I was able, when I was working for Dr. Dugan, as I mentioned, able to do some qualitative coding. So was going through interviews with medical students and finding themes in the interviews and creating kind of a schema for organizing those. So that's that particular experience I talked about in all my interviews. I feel like that was always something really helpful to bring up. And so things like that are, there's a similar process at MDRC for a lot of the qualitative research that they do. And so being able to have sort of a foundational understanding of what that looks like and how to do it, I think is great. And then I guess a difference that I felt between the work I was doing at BC and the work I'm doing now is definitely just in kind of like scope and timeline. So a lot of the projects I'm working on are like 5-year contracts or, partnerships that are lasting years. And that feels a little bit different from any work I was doing at BC, which felt pretty short term and, just kind of, more of a finite deadline and timeline. But that's something that I think is really exciting about the work that I get to do at MDRC, because I do feel like probably the most fruitful research and the things that are most helpful for our partner sites are things that are born out of a lasting, sustainable partnership that where we can really get to know the sites and what their processes are and what the challenges that their clients are facing are. So I feel like it's exciting to me to be able to see a longer timeline, but at the same time, you have to recalibrate your understanding of like when you're going to see results or when you're actually going to have a finished product, a report in your hands that kind of synthesizes everything. That can feel like it takes a long time to reach those milestones and get something concrete finished. So it just takes sort of like a recalibration of what expectations are.
It sounds like you had kind of a steep learning curve at both of your positions. So how did you like find mentors throughout that process, like help ease the transition?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I was really lucky. I am lucky at both of my positions to have had really great supervisors, people who were clearly invested in, my growth and helping me get better at my job and, cared about me outside of the work that I was producing as well. And so I think that's another like important part of the interview process as you all are looking for jobs is asking really clear questions about like who's going to be supervising me or my work and how often will we meet and what do those meetings look like and what are the opportunities for me to get advice on my personal professional goals or I think asking those questions is really key because that can help you kind of suss out maybe workplaces where that is not so present or there's not a lot of support for you to develop. And I also would definitely recommend, that everyone takes advantage of the BC alumni community as well, because every single person I've ever contacted, for advice or because I know they work for an organization that I find really interesting or, whatever the case is where I just want to connect. I don't think I've ever been, turned away from even, having a phone call or, meeting in person when that was safe. So I feel like the BC community is a really strong one, and in general the alumni love to help and love to, you know, connect you to whoever they can. And so I think that can be a really great way to kind of make connections that will you know, where you can just ask questions about, well, you know, what you think is important in your professional growth, and get a little bit of an outside perspective, because sometimes that can be helpful to go outside of the little bubble of the organization that you're in and get a broader view of things.
You talked a bit about how obviously you can't like visit places in person right now for your work. So we were wondering just in general what it's like working right now during COVID. Like, do you get Zoom fatigue? Is it hard to make connections with your colleagues you work with? Just like, what is that like? It's obviously a weird time, so it'd be interesting to hear about it.
Yeah, definitely. I would assume that a lot of the feelings are similar to what you all as students are feeling, and just kind of like, you know, there's been so much uncertainty and grief and just a lot of painful things this year. And so at times for me, and I'm sure for all of you, it can be like, but I have to write a paper now, and like it doesn't feel like there's like bigger things happening. So I definitely, you know, have to be really diligent with myself about taking care of myself in a way that I know will keep me motivated and keep me engaged. So for me, it's like I feel like this is very basic advice that I'm sure you all have heard, but things like taking a lunch break to make food and going for a walk, and like taking those mental breaks where you maybe get outside, or, you know, do some exercise or whatever feels good for you to like disconnect a little bit. I feel like that's been tough for me, you know, with all remote work, is kind of feeling like, what's the point of taking time off, because I'm just going to like be sitting in my apartment anyway, and so it's like might as well just work 24/7. But that's, you know, not a healthy mindset, and we all still deserve to like rest and rejuvenate. So I think, yeah, I just have to like set kind of firm boundaries with myself, that like I'm going to turn off my computer at 6 o'clock and I'm not going to look at any emails, or, you know, just being really um, clear with myself about those boundaries, I think is helpful. Um, and yeah, I think I've been lucky that my workplace that I'm with now, um, they try to do different, you know, maybe more social Zooms or things, you know, on our Teams chat, you know, sharing funny videos or stories or things like that to help people feel a little bit more engaged and feel like we can talk about things that are outside of work. So I really appreciate that. But it's definitely weird. Like I still, you know, I haven't met any of my coworkers in person, and probably won't for a while. So it definitely takes some creativity and just like willingness to reach out and ask to schedule a Zoom coffee chat or something, even though, you know, that's not my ideal way to get to know anyone. But I think I've just had to take those sort of like, take those leaps and ask people to connect, because otherwise it can feel really lonely, I think, to work from home all the time. So yeah, I guess that I don't feel like I have it figured out at all, but I guess those would be the words of advice I have.
Great, thank you so much, Ellie. So that's it for our questions. I think we're just gonna open the floor to anybody else if they have any questions.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for being here, Ellie. I spent the summer working at a domestic violence shelter, so I was just kind of wondering, like, how you created like work-life balance, making sure that you were like healthy outside of work, and then also like how you marketed those skills as you were trying to find a new job.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love hearing about other people doing that type of work. So yeah, I think that was a really tough part of like my learning curve at that job, was figuring out how to balance being an empathetic service provider, where I needed to be present with people in their, you know, in their suffering or in their pain, and, you know, be really able to respond to that. And I think just naturally, if you're being an empathetic person in a situation like that, you're going to take some of that on, and, you know, kind of carry some of that trauma with you. There's a lot of, you know, research and talk about vicarious trauma, secondary trauma. So things when you hear those types of stories, or you're working with people who have gone through those things, it does kind of seep into you. So I had to be really, again, I think it came back to setting a lot of my own boundaries of, I did things like, I had a visual cue on my commute to and from work where it was like, once I hit that, I can start thinking about work now. And when I'm coming home, once I hit that spot, I'm done thinking about work. And, to varying degrees of success, because of course you're going to have cases or clients where it really sticks with you and it really feels like hard to think about other things. I personally struggled with a lot of feelings of like guilt from, I was working in a shelter, so a lot of people didn't have a lot of resources. And then I was going home to my apartment, which was nice. And I was able to, to do things like go out to dinner. I was able to travel. So, I had to spend a lot of time in my own supervision with my supervisor at that shelter, kind of like going through what was coming up for me as I was working with clients, and being able to be really self-reflective of like, I felt like crying when that client like said that to me. So I know I'm gonna write that down, and I'm gonna bring that to my supervisor to talk about it, because I don't want to just like keep this in. So I think I was, again, super lucky to have a supervisor that I really felt comfortable to do that with. But I do think, yeah, you have to have an outlet for it. So whether that's a therapist or supervisor or other people in your life who are a support system to you, just finding ways to kind of like express what you're feeling and know that it's okay what you're feeling, but the tough thing is to keep it in. And so I think just finding those supports that are either formally in place for you or informally that you feel like you can take advantage of to kind of just like let it out. I think that was really important for me.
I'll jump in real quick. Thank you. This has been such a thoughtful and really great conversation. I appreciate the questions and Ellie, all of your great responses. One of the things that struck me we haven't talked about yet is the fact that you're working on domestic policy coming out of an international studies program. I wonder if you might say a little bit about how your experiences living, traveling abroad, studying abroad, and thinking about global issues and things like that. How do you bring those into your work on domestic policy and with very sort of, at times, what appears to be local problems?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And it's something that I sometimes, like when I tell people I majored in international studies, I feel like sometimes it's like, oh, that, it's interesting that you do what you do now. I think so many of the skills that I learned in the IS program are very applicable. We talked a lot about the writing stuff. I think also just learning about kind of like the idea of stakeholders and like who will be affected by this, and what will the outcomes be if we make this choice, and who cares about it, and why do they care about it. All of those things are very evident in domestic policy as well. It's the same thought process and the same kind of careful consideration of kind of, if this, then what, and who's going to be affected. So I think that sort of framework permeates the work that I do now in a lot of ways. I also think that I'm really grateful to have had all the experiences I did thinking and working with refugees and asylum seekers and immigrants. That was huge in my work at the domestic violence shelter. We were working with a lot of immigrants, and having an understanding of some of that background and history, I think, makes you a better service provider. And the same thing goes in the research process too. It's like we're making policy that's going to affect people who are living in the US, but that also that includes a lot of people who might be undocumented. It includes a lot of people who are refugees, and it includes a lot of people who are, working with a green card. And so what do those policy changes mean for those different groups? And that's something that I think that, yeah, I bring that lens to some work that a lot of the people I work with don't. And so I think it's really valuable to be able to have had those experiences and to have those, that lens to share with others who might not be thinking about what the impact of this policy is going to be on that particular group.
Thank you.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to come talk to you about your experiences, and Naima and Grace for the questions. I just kind of wanted to ask two kind of related questions. First of all, do you have like any specific advice on searching for jobs in research directly after undergrad? And kind of, is it much more likely, more common for people kind of going into research to have some other like more practical experience that then before then going into research, or is it like kind of much preferred they have that before going into research? Thank you.
Yeah, those are great questions. I think it probably depends on the type of organization that you're going to be working with. I know that for me, the reason I was hired was because I had that experience working directly with people as a case manager, because they're doing a lot of research about how we can, help case managers do their job better. And so for me to have had that experience, that was really, valuable to them, even though I didn't have a lot of those more, I guess, like technical skills, technical research skills. I think that, yeah, I guess it depends on what they're going to be looking for, but I think it is a lot about how you can market yourself. And I don't like to use that term, but it's kind of, the story you tell about yourself, and seeing all the experiences that you've had as an asset and being able to talk about them as an asset. And so, I didn't bring the SAS programming to the table, but I did bring a lot of this experience where I'm able to have connected with clients and elevate lived experience now in the research process in a way that other people might not be able to if they had gone, straight into the research field, for example, or something like that. And so, yeah, I think it's about being able to like tell your own story of your experiences with a lot of like conviction and gusto about why you are a valuable asset, because regardless of the technical skills or whatever experiences you have had, there are going to be things that would make you valuable to a research institution. So I think just like focusing in on those and being able to like articulate that and communicate that in a really clear way is definitely helpful. Was the first part of your question what advice for getting a research job specifically? Okay.
Yeah, I know you were kind of helpful about kind of general job searching strategies, because I think I'm kind of going through the same thing where it's like, it's not your fault, but you're just not getting interviews, even though you're submitting for doing the coffee chats, all the Zoom chats and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I don't even know if I have much advice beyond just keep just keep doing it, like keep submitting those applications, keep asking to meet with people. I think obviously it's helpful to like, if you have professors who know someone who work at an organization, or to leverage those networks. I'm sure that can be helpful. I didn't actually do that, but I know that can work for people. And I also think having strong references, like that was something that it took me a while to learn. I think when I went through my internship experience and submitted references to get like a professional internship the summer after my junior year, I like didn't really have a clear understanding of like who I should be asking and why. And I feel like I became much more aware of like, yeah, this person I actually worked with on this, and they can really speak to that well. And like having a conversation with them too about like what the job is and how they can like also write that reference or letter of recommendation or whatever it is to help you come off in the best light possible, or in the most aligned with that organization and that job as possible. So I guess that's one thing to consider. But I know it can definitely be like very brutal out there. And I got so many rejections. And so everyone does, I think. And so it's just, yeah, I think it's a lot about just kind of pushing through. And I mean, if you're able to, not that everyone wants to or is able to, but I also felt a lot of pressure to like start working right away, right after graduating. And if you're able to, take a little bit of time for yourself, if that's something that's feasible to do, like I guarantee that no one is going to look at like a couple month gap on a resume and just like, no, shred it. So I think that maybe this is not the advice everyone would give, but my advice is to just like, everyone can relax a little bit and, take things as they come and know that, these things will work out eventually because you are all very employable people. And so just like holding that and knowing that despite all of the chaos that comes with the job search, which easier said than done because I was not very calm, cool, and collected throughout it. But that is the advice I would give now to myself back then.
Well, if no one else has any more questions, we can wrap it up. Thank you so much, Ellie. This has been such an interesting and informative conversation. If students have any further questions for you, is there a way that they could connect with you?
Yeah. I don't know if I should put my email in the chat or what would be.
It's up to you. If your LinkedIn page or like your email, whatever, you feel most comfortable with.
Okay, I'll just put my email here. I'm actually not very big on LinkedIn, so I probably won't see anything that goes there, but that's my personal email. So anyone can feel free to send me questions or anything. I'm always happy to chat. So I feel like I've gotten a fair amount of current BC students, just wanting to have a quick phone conversation. I'm always happy to do things like that. So yeah, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thanks for taking the time on a Friday and a holiday to talk to us.
Of course. Yeah, everyone enjoy the
Thank you,
holiday
Ellie.
weekend. Yeah, it was great to be here.
Yeah, great to see you again, Ellie. Take care. Good luck.
You too. Bye.